Now, a little bit about Dr. Srikanth. He's a founder at Chakra Venture Partners, a venture firm which specializes in M&A, private equity, IPOs, and corporate law with a focus on startups. Now, he's also serving as a CFO of a venture capital fund. He serves as a board member at various different startups, and he's also a visiting professor at IIMs and various other international B schools. Now, over to you, Dr. Srikanth.
Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction, Parag. Parag and I have a very long history interacting with startups, and we find interaction with startups to be quite unique. And this is the first time that I'm addressing the Kerala Startup Mission. And though a majority of my clients, a quite significant majority of my clients are originating from that particular state. And I also visit the state quite often, visiting IIM Kozhikode quite a number of times. If you haven't been to IIM Kozhikode, you should be. That I hope that doesn't impinge upon my time of 11 o'clock, which I intend to start. A warm welcome to all of you who have attended. I see about 28 attendees at the moment. A very warm welcome to you. And thank you for making it to the presentation. And the theme for today's presentation is going to be something called zero-based budgeting. And zero-based budgeting is something that you may have heard of in your MBA programs or your undergraduate programs, or simply your investor talking about how do you budget your costs for the next 6 months. Pitch decks are nothing but another amorphic form of zero-based budgeting. So I'm here to talk about zero-based budgeting and how does that affect post-COVID as such. We have all been overwhelmed by this particular crisis, and it is a very neutral crisis, isn't it? I mean, it is a very agnostic crisis. It affects everyone and anyone. So in a recent paper which I had written for the Harvard Business Review, where I had mentioned data about how there is a cascading effect from the GPs and the LPs. LPs not investing in the GPs, and the GPs not investing in the startups, and so on and so forth, which is percolated to good companies not being funded. So this particular paper is still under review. So my kind request, as Parag would also have mentioned to you, is that this particular zero-based budgeting program, which I'm going to be sharing with you, is also going to be part of that particular paper. So without digressing, I just want to set a tone for zero-based budgeting. Now, what does zero-based budgeting basically mean is something that we'll cover in the first 15 minutes or so. It's going to be a bit academic in nature, and you can expect that from an academician like me. So no complaints about that. So that's the first thing. And second thing is, after that, we'll take about 15 minutes to take to get into real examples, and followed by another 15 minutes into how we can implement zero-based budgeting and why zero-based budgeting. And the last 15 minutes we'll take into, again, real-life examples, real case studies, and so on and so forth. Now, why am I eligible to talk about zero-based budgeting? I claim to be no expert in zero-based budgeting, but I have implemented 3 zero-based budgeting programs, including one in Unilever, where we achieved 18% reduction in costs, the company overall. So it wasn't a reduction in the SG&A, the sales and general administration costs as such. It was a overall 18% reduction in costs in totality. And this was directly flowing from the CFO's office. Second, I implemented a zero-based budgeting in one of the major pharmaceutical player. I wouldn't be privy to name the player, but again, the largest supplier to the US, and having a family office here in India. Third, I implemented a zero-based budgeting for a venture capital fund. And this was to basically, when they were facing the crisis of FOMO effect, when Flipkart and the Snapdeals were funded, and they were clamoring as to where to fund next, and so on and so forth. I implemented a zero-based budgeting over there. So I'm going to be talking about my experiences, and it is not going to be a session. Let me get that out of the hand quickly. It is not going to be a session. It's going to be an interaction between you and me. It's going to be a place where we think and we arrive at what could be best for your startup and what could be best for best strategy or the best foot forward for COVID 19, and hopefully a fiscal 21-22 to be a very good year. So that being said, I just want to set a tone for that. That's my opening dialogue or my monologue. I'll quickly share my presentation with you so that you may be privy to what I'm talking about. And just give me 1 second. In your Q&A, if you could just answer whether you can see the screen. Super. Thank you
I
so
can
much.
see you, yes.
Yes. Give me 1 second. So I represent a firm called Chakra Venture Partners. We have offices in India, Singapore, Hong Kong, and UK. I won't take more than 30 seconds of this because it's going to be old news to you, and it's not going to be interesting at all. So I started my career with Citibank when the oil prices were exactly tangentially opposite of what it is today. Today it is negative, and in that time it was $160 a barrel, and the rupee was stronger than. I mean, we were so proud of the rupee. The rupee was trading in 30 rupees against the dollar, and we made so many trades and so on and so forth. I was reporting into Srikanth Venkatachari, Srikanth V, the name that I share with, and he is now the CFO of Reliance Industries. This being said, I started with Citibank in the India Treasury team, moved on to Singapore, moved on to London as well, and then I set up Chakra Venture Partners with a focus on M&A, private equity, venture capital, primarily serving venture capital as well as family offices. In my 13-year stint as a M&A expert, I have led over 30 deals, and 30 deals include programs like the zero-based budgeting and so on and so forth. I've authored 2 papers, and I'm also a visiting professor, like Prag mentioned. I'm very grateful to him for mentioning that at the Indian Institutes of Management and SPGing globally. I've taught at Sydney, I've taught at Dubai, I've taught at Singapore, I've taught at US, and so on and so forth. I hold a PhD from the US, so so the prefixes that you see in my name are the conglomeration of that. Without further ado, let's go to what is zero-based budgeting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be putting my screen on full share so that you can uh, see that very clearly. Uh, what is zero-based budgeting? So one thing before I start this, Parag, when I do a full screen, I wouldn't be able to I wouldn't be able to see the questions. So if you could either WhatsApp me or how would you like to do this?
Okay, so I think we should just finish your presentation just to keep within the time limit, and after that we'll let the questions accumulate, and we'll have a session purely for the questions at the end of it.
Sure.
Right? And to the attendees, I would request that you keep adding your questions on the Q&A tab, and if you have any slide-specific questions, do mention that as well, and then we'll pick it up at the end of the session.
Good, great. So what is zero-based budgeting? Zero-based budgeting is basically a mechanism where so I'm gonna delve into the semantics of zero-based budgeting. A zero-based budgeting. So budgeting is an exercise. Budgeting is an exercise where We budget for certain amount for a particular year, for a particular cost, for a particular activity, and we are tagging on a particular line or a particular program called zero basing it. Now, all of you must have drawn up your budgets. All of you must have seen how your budgets are built, how your budgets are presented to your potential investors, in which you say that year one, if I capture 1% of the total market and if I service that particular 1%, this is going to be my revenue. And to service my revenue, my cost is going to be 30% of the cost, which is what my competitor is charging, and my overheads are going to be 40%, which is what my competitor is doing, and then my net margin is going to be 30%. Or you may run into a loss and say that my EBITDA margins is zero. Now, this is exactly the conundrum that Zomato and Swiggy faced. I'm in privy to say that because I have personally seen them present this particular style of, I would say, budgeting technique to a particular venture capitalist. Unfortunately, post COVID, that is not going to work. And I'm going to be building a story as to why it is not going to work. So, what is a zero based budgeting? Zero based budgeting is a tool to take control of your budgets. Now, it may sound like budgeting itself is an exercise that you take to actually, that you use to actually take control of your budgets. Now, why should you use the zero based budgeting to actually take control of your budgets? Now, budgeting as a technique has an inherent flaw. And the inherent flaw is that we always tend to use the technique that we have used in the past. For example, if I have always used a PowerPoint to make a particular presentation, I would not go for any other methodologies of presentation other than PowerPoint. Now, that's a bias, that's a cognitive bias or a tendency that we have towards a particular style. Now, that does not change much with budgets. So when you say that I am a 100 crore enterprise and I intend to grow to say 200 crore enterprise in next year, you would naturally do a multiplier of say 2 on marketing, 1.5 on probably promotional activities, 1.2 on finance because finance comes last. In finance is a non-value additive exercise, and it's irrational as such. Irrational may be too harsh a word, but it is not scientific as such. So what happens is there is a cognitive bias towards a rule which is a situation where you tend to look back to the heuristics. So heuristics is basically a measure of what has been done in the past. You repeat the same thing because you want to achieve the same results. Now that is a tendency that zero-based budgeting actually tries to crack, and it says that you have to rethink your budgets. Now that brings me to the second point, which is you have to rethink the finances of the company and build a template around the base which is built. So you identify the specific departments, you identify each of the departments which is contributing to the overall revenue of the company, overall growth of the company, overall value addition of the company, and you estimate as to why that particular sum should be allocated for that particular company or for that particular department. Now, from a company perspective, you'll understand more in the subsequent slides as to what I'm trying to say. But for a zero-based budgeting to work, everything must start from zero, which means that unfortunately, I'm going to give you the bad news. You will have to think that everything is zero. So post-COVID, uh, it's not a possibility. It's a reality that everything would start from zero, apart from the existing contracts that you have. So it is quite possible that your biggest customer would have dropped out and said that, look, I don't want to continue with you because there is a cost cutting exercise which is happening at my end. It is quite possible that your existing employees may say that, look, I'm trying to move on because the company is not paying me the salary that I want, and so on and so forth. So everything must start with a zero to assume that if you were to start the company right now, what would the state of affairs of the company would be. So that is the most underplayed a casualty of a zero based budgeting. So gone are the days when you estimate that your previous drawn was X and you make 1.3 times of X. So if you are a employee, if you are a employee of a startup, if you are an employee of a large organization, if you're a founder, you basically pay yourself a particular salary and you say that you think that this year I'll be drawing 1.3 times, 1.2 times, 1.3 one time, 1.07 times. Those days are gone. If you are implementing a zero-based budgeting, in a recent poll conducted by Harvard, post-COVID, startups are readily accepting zero-based budgeting to the extent of 73%. And by startups, the definition was companies which have raised between $100,000 to $1 million. So that has been the definition of startups according to Harvard. So gone are the days that the company budgets that this particular department will be allocated X, and the expectation would be, X Z times X of that particular department. For example, it happens in marketing. For those the marketing folks out here, you would have experienced a situation where the company allocates, say, 5 crores to you and expects that you will add to the top line about 10x of that, which is about 50 crores. Now, those days are gone. Now, why those days are gone? Because the multiplier that they used itself was based on competitive data. Now, with competition around you having a major effect, which is nobody is able to make a sale except for pharma and healthcare. Every other sector is down. Everybody's finding it difficult to make a sale. The rollover effect is happening for different industries and so on and so forth. So zero based, without confusing you, zero based budgeting is nothing but a tool to actually rethink. It's a mental change management program where you mentally challenge yourself to say that if I were to start up right now, if I were to allocate budgets rationally and to think of what benefits will I derive from that particular department, then what would my budget be? So that is a zero-based budgeting. So I'm starting on a very, very clean slate, and I'm saying that here's a clean slate. Tell me what you want. So this is something that you would have experienced in typical negotiation programs with investors, where I recall the first time that we pitched with a company. I was on the sell side with a particular VC as such, and the VC handed out a plain piece of paper and he said, write exactly how much do you want and do a subtraction. I don't want these fancy Excel sheets. Write exactly in a plain sheet of paper what exactly that you want and how much you're going to spend it on. So, I think we are rolling back to those days. So COVID has a silver lining. The silver lining is your budgets of 2019, which you had drawn up for 2020, will have to be relooked. So there are two kinds of people that you may have. As an entrepreneur, you will have to you will have to take care of your employees as well. As an employee, you have to take care of the entrepreneur. Let's have no two thoughts about it. If you're an entrepreneur, this is the time to make the priority list of spends. So you will have to prioritize your spends. So if your spend for this particular year is going to be that I'm going to be doing a digital marketing program, I'm going to be putting up hoardings in all the highways, I'm going to be promoting myself with an IPL boundary line promotion. Maybe this may be the time to rethink and classify in terms of what is of utmost importance to you. No offense over here. I'm not saying that the promotion for IPL would be a bad idea, but the very fact that IPL itself is not going to be happening and budgeting for that may be a bad idea. It would be best to consult before you prioritize. So speak to your promoters, speak to advisors, speak to people, speak to your competitors. Everybody is facing the same situation. You are not alone in this process. You are fortunately you've got enough support out there because everybody is facing the same. But speak to them and try to gauge as to what they prioritize. Now, again, I have to put a disclaimer over here that your competitor or your friends may not be an indicator as to how you want to spend your money as such. Say you have raised $100,000 in the previous year, and in this particular year you want to spend that particular $100,000 in a particular activity, and your friends may say that, look, prioritize that to pay yourself a salary, prioritize that to possibly pay your topmost employees, prioritize that to put the bell curve in effect, and so on and so forth. So maybe you should take that advice, but say take that advice only for the best practices as such. The prioritization process usually carries a benefit assessment. You have to carry out a benefit assessment in terms of whether the benefit is being achieved by that particular prioritization. For example, if you are there is a particular list that you need to build, which is a must-have list and a good-to-have list. So a must-have list will typically have the spends that you will have, irrespective of whether you are in business or not in business, or God forbid, but whether you are in business or you are running short of funds, or you have raised an extra of funds as such. So a benefit assessment is basically an assessment of how much benefits will that particular spend give me. So with what is the biggest bang for the buck that I will get for a particular spend as such. For example, there are certain entrepreneurs that I know who have ambitions of employing, no offense over here, I mean, say Shah Rukh Khan for promoting their product, and Shah Rukh Khan doesn't come cheap. He's quite expensive. So if that is to be done, what is the benefit that the company will derive out of that particular spend? So that assessment has to be done, and that has to be clear before you make that particular spend. Now, ZBB is built on the principle as to why you had the expense in the first place. If you recall, if you, I'm just trying to go down the memory lane over here. And if you recall, some of the spends that you have incurred when you were a startup and when you just started off, you incurred just because there's a particular philosophy called Chalta Hai attitude, right? Oh, it's a small spend. Oh, I have ordered for an office party from Swiggy. It cost me over 15,000 rupees. I have made a outbound journey. I've made company program where everybody gets incentivized. Uh, you know, I have an outreach program, I have a marketing program, I have a digital marketing program. First of all, when you onboarded that particular vendor, what was the thought process that you had when you onboarded that particular vendor? You have to rethink that particular principle, because entrepreneurs tend to actually fall back and not rethink that particular process to say that why did I have that particular spend? Why am I continuing to spend that particular amount of money? It could be as simple as this: you are ordering 50 cups of tea every month for your office, and each employee is taking one more cup, and you are paying say 10 rupees per cup for that particular tea, and this has been continuing for the past 2 years, right? I'm taking a very, very simple example. Now, can there be an alternative supplier who could supply you at 5 rupees per cup? Or can there be a vending machine in your office which could dispense that particular tea as such? So, you don't have to carry forward costs as such, which is what the principle of ZBB is all about. It's about rethinking as to why you incurred that particular expense in the first place. There's of much importance to startups because of the fact that startups have to do jigard. Startups have to go lean. Startups have to go lean and mean when it comes to post-COVID. So it does not mean that I cut randomly budgets across. I fire 20 people. I fire 5 people. I don't pay myself a salary. No, that is not a scientific process. A scientific process would be a ZBB program. Now, if you are an employee, look at the last fundraise and how much of that was allocated for employee benefits. If you're an employee, you have to look through. The reason why I talk about employee is because you have companies who have raised three-digit, multi-million dollar, fundraise in the past 2 years, I would say, and much of that was allocated for the CXO salaries. So that is something that you need to question yourself. And you need to ask yourself a question: if you were to be rehired as an entrepreneur, again, you can also be benefited by this particular question, which is to say that if you were to be rehired, if you were to rehire that particular employee, what is the salary that you would pay? Unfortunately, salaries are I mean, gone are the days that you say that, give me the last pay stub. I will pay you a 30% increment on your last pay stub, and so on and so forth. It is more of, what is the value contribution that you bring to the overall organization, and if you intend to maintain the same salary, what is the one biggest reason that the employer would have to retain you? So that's a question that you need to ask yourself as an employee, and as an entrepreneur, you need to ask yourself a question as to why you want to retain that particular employee. So all I'm trying to, the theme or the takeaway from this particular slide is this: no random cuts, no percentage cuts across the board, but individual case by case analysis as to what is the benefit of retaining that particular cost and what is the benefit of not retaining that particular cost. Many people make the mistake of thinking that ZBB is a cost reduction program, which is something that I'll come to in the next few slides. But why ZBB is required? Discretionary spend is not the norm in these tough times. So there is something called a discretionary spend. A discretionary spend is, any excess cash. For example, you would have raised people who have raised multi-million dollar, I would say fundraise in the past 2 years, have raised that for discretionary raise for growth. So that is called a growth fund or a growth capital that they raise, but that is going to be purely discretionary in nature, which is, you allocate that for a particular cost which is phenomenally high. So managers themselves are finding it difficult to retain in budget. So do you need so many layers of management in your startup is something that you need to question yourself. So founders over here, you ask a question: do you need a manager? Do you need a supervisor? Do you need a person who actually who is leading a particular team? Can you lead that particular team? Because you have equity, you have sweat in the company, you have your skin in the company. So that's something that's a choice that you need to do. A choice is to be made between a must-have and a good-to-have. It's very, very difficult to have a clean chart. I mean, if I were to implement a ZBB right away to you, I would ask you to take a clean sheet of paper and draw a column straight in between and say, and write two things: must have and good to have. So what are your must have costs and what are your good to have costs? The choice would be the former. Because the fact that you want to pay yourself a salary, you want to pay your employees a salary, you want to pay your T vendors a salary. T vendors your costs. You want to maintain your marketing costs and so on and so forth. But it's very, very tough to actually bifurcate between the two because of the fact that there is not enough information. There's a lack of information which is out there because you don't know what is your must have and what is your good to have. You can collect that particular process by your competitor data, or your competitor himself or herself may drive the data to you. Case in point, when Swiggy and Zomato opened, you would have seen that in the Zomato app and Swiggy app as well. Swiggy Super does not exist anymore. So people who are subscribed to Swiggy Super cannot, at least in my area, cannot subscribe to Swiggy Super. So which means that the costs are actually going up. So there was a deep discounting which was done earlier by having a free delivery, and that has been taken away. And second, when you have a particular restaurant giving you a 50% discount, Zomato has to, I mean, I'm talking about Swiggy, and Swiggy gives you a 50% discount. Zomato has to follow the suit and give you a 50% discount because the consumer is used to having a 50% discount. So would that classify into a good to have or would that classify into a must have is a choice that you need to make. And that's something of an evolutionary process that you need to drive from within the organization. As long as you keep the unit economics right, you can afford any kind of discounts that you can have. How many must-haves do you have to drive the ZBB process? So you need to ask yourselves, is the must-have list too large for me to actually abandon the ZBB process? For example, in the clean sheet of paper which I asked you to take out and actually classify between a must-have and a good to have, if everything falls into a must-have, then maybe the ZBB program is not suited for you. Maybe mentally you're not adjusted yourself to a ZBB program. But mind you, when your competitors start implementing a ZBB program, and which Unilever did 3 years back, because they had a GST issue coming up and they had to keep their costs down. Why do you think Unilever products are being stocked regularly with all the supermarkets and so on and so forth? Because the ZBP program was implemented long back and it has already been implemented and the benefits are being reaped in the 3 years that they have implemented. It would be a good to list the intent of the expense before incurring it. So when once in a while you can indulge yourself by having a cocktail party and so on and so forth. But I'm not judging you over here, but it would be good to list the intent of the expense. So when you're going out with a client and at the moment you can't because there's a lockdown, but you're going out to a pub and you are buying the client a drink, and you're faced with a situation as to whether that particular expense, whether that particular client will convert or not. So the intent is to make the client convert. So it's better to jot down, like a psychotherapist will ask you to do, to jot down the intent of the expense before you incur it. Some of the expenses that you incur, once you jot down that particular list, you realize that, why did I incur that particular expense at all? So why was I wearing a Salvatore Ferragamo shoes when I could, possibly wear a Bata shoes, right? So I'm not talking about luxury experiences over here, but what I'm trying to say is it'll be good to list the intent of the expense before incurring it. There could be two definitions of the ZBB. One, one would be to spend less. You may purely want to spend less. And one would be to have a view of the entity. Now, post COVID, I imagine that a majority of you would want to spend less and less because your investors would have said, look, boss, I can't fund you anymore. I'm also, going through a rough phase. My investments are down and so on and so forth. But trust me, 21, 22, 22, 23, these VCs are going to be coming chasing back to you because of the fact that they've implemented a zero-based budgeting or a budgeting program which is aligned to their goals as such. Now, if your intent is to, so you could have two views. If you could have two goals. One goal could be spending less. If that is a view, then you need to have a single defining target. So the single defining target would be overall across the board, I will ensure that my prices are the cheapest in the market. Now, this is a very, very, carpet bomb statement that I've made over here. If I'm going to be the cheapest in the market, how am I going to ensure it? So from that comes the individual department's cost, and to show that individual departments have to make that particular cost cut to reach that particular target. Case in point, if you are a website developer and if you say that everybody is developing websites for 15,000 rupees and you are developing a website which is going to be I don't quite know, is it a static website or a dynamic website? If it's going to be a static website, pardon my understanding of technology over here, but it's going to be a static website. It is going to be you are going to ensure that the end price of the customer is going to be 10,000 rupees plus GST if at all you are a GST registered. Now that is a single defining target. From there, you roll down to the departments to say that look, my target is to ensure that my overall price is going to be 10,000. tell me what are the costs which are must have, what are the costs which are good to have. Now you have to differentiate between two fundamental facts. There is something called target based costing and there is something called zero based costing. What I'm defining right now is target based costing. What I'm defining after that, which is rolling down to the departments, is zero based budgeting. So target based costing is basically saying that my competitor Zomato is offering a 50% discount. Swiggy should also offer a 50% discount. Is a target based costing. Uh, Another example that I can take is Grofers is giving 20% discount. Let's talk about milk delivery, which is going to be which is again very hot sector. Milk delivery, super delivery is going to be giving me zero charge delivery. Big Basket on the other hand is charging me 1 rupee per day for a delivery. So what's the difference? And apart from that, both of them give their own baskets and so on and so forth. So a single defining target is basically a target where you define that, look, this is what my overall cost is going to be, and then you roll down to the individual departments to say that if this is going to be the target, what is going to be your role in contribution of cost to that particular target. So if marketing and sales is going to be saying that, look, that particular target is achievable only if we do more marketing, if we do, if we do more penetration marketing, if we do more digital marketing, if we take out all the billboards, if we don't subscribe for so and so, if we don't, put out a ad on a Times of India, so be it. So you'll have to chalk out from the individual departments as to how they are going to be achieving that particular target. That is A. Now, the last point, what is within ZBB and what is not within ZBB? For example, a lot of you may want to consider only one particular cost and say that, look, this is within ZBB. All of you, startups and mature startups and funded startups alike would have one single and one or two anchor customers, right? And this particular anchor customers, you may say that for those anchor customers, I will do a zero-based budgeting, which means to say that for them to retain with me, I will implement something called a zero-based budgeting to say that if I have to give that particular price to that particular customer, what would be the individual loading of costs that would happen to that particular customer? Now, in the subsequent slides, I'll give you an example of that. The other view would be the view of the entity. The view of the entity would be to understand what your competitors are doing, to identify where your spend is, to identify where your traditional, what is required and what is not. I believe most of you would not want to go down that particular path unless you are a large organization. So I'll skip that particular part, but I'll be more than happy to address that one-on-one with you if at all you would want to take that particular view. Now, how does a traditional budgeting work and how does a ZBB work? Real life example. So you have a traditional budget where you have sales. FY 2021, you have sales, which to say that I'll achieve 20% growth, for which the variable cost will be 1.2 times. The contribution again is a derivation of sales minus variable cost. The employee cost is 200,000. I'm multiplying that by 1.07 because I'm assuming that 7% is inflation, 7% is the increment that they will expect, and so on and so forth. Marketing, I'm having 200,000. I'm looking at the left traditional budget, and you'll have 1.1 times of that, and then you'll have a net of 300,000 and a net of 406,000 as such. So this is a traditional budget. Now, if you see in the traditional budget, it's quite unscientific because of the fact that there is always a multiplier, and this multiplier is derived on the fact that look, marketing, my competitor is doing a marketing of if you're in the tech space, you will realize this, that my competitor Byju's is employing Shah Rukh Khan, and I'm a tech player as well. Why should I not employ Domino Thomas? Why should I not employ Mohan Lal, and so on and so forth? So that's a question that you will ask yourself, if you follow the traditional budget. Now, how does a ZBB budget look like? FY20, I'm taking as is. FY21, I have the FY1, which is the first year that you started the sales. What were the efforts that you made to make that particular sale, plus carry forward customers? So, I'll give an example. If I were to accumulate my customers right from the beginning, and if I were to prospect customers from now, what would be the sales effort conversion that will happen? That's one part of the equation. The second part of the equation would be of the 100,000 of the 1 million that I have from the previous year sales. How many of them have said that okay, chalega yaar, I mean, I'll carry forward to the next year. I'll carry on with you. Don't worry, I'm there to support you. That's the first question that you need to ask yourself. Variable cost again is the same thing. You have a committed cost and then you have FYE1 cost, which is in FYE1 when you are bare bones, when you are working in a garage, when you are working in a co-working space, when you are working in when you're working from your homes, when you didn't have an office as such. What were the costs that you incurred for the sales, for the top line, one line above that, for the sales that you converted? On top of that, you need to add something called a committed cost. Now, committed cost is something which you cannot go away from. ZBB does not mean that if any of you have watched this particular episode of Office, you can't declare bankruptcy. You can't declare that you're not going to be incurring that particular cost. There are certain committed costs. So what are those committed costs? The committed costs are basically contractual agreements. The committed costs are basically employee commitments which you have given already in writing, legally enforceable, and we are only talking about legally enforceable contracts over here. Now, from that flows your contribution, and then your employee. Employee cost was 200,000 last year. Each cluster of 3 employees. This is just an example. From my experience, I've just I've clustered into 3. You may want to cluster into 2. You may want to cluster into 5, and so on and so forth. Should submit a proposal as to why budget should be allocated to them. Because typically departments in large organizations, for example, you are a startup which is into tech space, you have a content developer, you have a website manager, you have website developer, you have a marketing person, you have a outbound person, you have possibly an in-house recruit who's just taking care of the finances and so on and so forth. In that particular case, it could just be one person. But I've taken an average and said that look, ask 3 people for belonging to a particular department to submit their proposal as to why budget should be allocated to them. If they are not able to come up with a comprehensive budget and say that look, this is what I'm going to be allocating, this is what I need, and this is why I need it. The why is very important. Then you have a clear case of not including that particular cost in your zero-based budgeting at all, and then flows the same for your marketing as well. You can replicate the same 3 employees model, or you can say that there are certain carry forward marketing that you need to do plus the FYE1 marketing efforts. Now, for marketing, it's a bit difficult because of the fact that if you recall, during the earlier part of my discussion, I said Unilever implemented ZBB and achieved 18% reduction in cost overall. Now, 18% is a blended overall reduction in cost. Now, post-COVID, it is quite possible that you may have to incur more costs in marketing. Let's face it, there are certain outreach that you need to do. You may have to go back to your customers. You may have to do promotional marketing. You may have to do certain activities to convert a particular customer. So that can be offset by reduction in costs in other departments. So in overall as a blend, you may have the company reducing the price overall as such, reducing the cost overall as such. But marketing, mind you, need not be a reduction as such. It can be an increase as well. So zero-based budgeting program is not a decrease or it's not a spending less program. It's a spending less overall program. So overall you spend less, But individually, you may want to spend more. For example, marketing is one example. One for the startups that I'm mentoring, or I'm as a CFO, I am approving budgets where marketing efforts are actually going up because of the fact that the COVID has an impact as such. Um, let's add depth to whatever we just said. It may sound a little theoretical. So you have the CEO's office. The CEO's office has to define the zero-based budgeting target. Now, if you recall, I'll just quickly spend back, which is the first line item in the spending less in the on your left. The first item that you see, which is single defining target, we are referring to that. And with that, we are moving forward to the CEO's office to say that CEO's office has to define, or the board has to decide the single strategy for ZBB. So, what is the strategy for ZBB? The ZBB strategy could be that, look, by 2021, I should have funding from my venture capitalist, from my angel network, to the extent of $1 million, and that $1 million will be spent on ABC. So what will happen is, typically there are four departments. There is a marketing, there is an R&D, there is a production, there are support services. Now, what you need to ask your employees to do is the four activities. A, to define the owner of the budget. You need to define who owns the budget. For example, if you're a startup, you need to basically say that it could be a co-founder as well. It could be a co-founder who has to come up with a budgeting plan for why he or she should be spending that amount of money for that particular department. So that your co-founder would be the head of the department. You have to populate the data in a standard template, because you cannot have templates flying around here and there, because a typical template would look like cost, the intent of the cost, is it a must have or a good to have, right? So we'll have three columns like that, and categorize the spend into discretionary spend and essential spend, and provide an explanation as to why that spend classification has been into good to have or must have. Now that will roll up to set my GM, gross margin, and EBITDA targets. Now, why it is so important for startups is because, as a venture capitalist, I look at my EBITDA targets and I say that, look, a company which I want to be in, I want to invest in 2021 should have an EBITDA targets. It should have an EBITDA margin of positive EBITDA margin. Now, how do you achieve positive EBITDA margin if all your efforts are negative? So, if you see the most funded startups right now, statistically, their EBITDA is negative. So how do you achieve a positive EBITDA? So positive EBITDA is going to be the goal. I'll digress just a little bit to give you a quote from a particular VC who said, in 2016, if you could code, you could be funded. In 2019, if you could scale, you could be funded. In 2020, if you could survive, you're funded. So ZBB is a program which will allow you to survive. It is not a program for you to generate funds and so on and so forth. It'll be an eventuality. If you survive, the eventuality will be that you are fundable as such. Now, once that happens, so coming back to the topic that I was talking about, under the marketing head that you will see, you have these 4 points, right? These 4 points will flow to the CFO's office. It could be this co-founder himself or herself. Now, the co-founder will basically feed to say that, look, this particular department has given me this particular budget. It is in alignment or not in alignment with my GM targets. Identify your outliers and feedback on ZBB strategy. You'll be amazed by the number of people who resist a ZBB program. If you ask someone to say that, look, take a piece of paper and write down your must have and good to have expenditure, they'll just say, boss, I don't have time for this. So there'll be a lot of resistance. Please be aware of that. There should be, and then there is cost reduction measures. So what cost reduction measures? So once you have outliers, once you have alignment to, so people who fall in line with the overall ZBB or a zero-based budgeting program are the ones who will survive, and the ones who won't survive, the Darwinism will take over, and probably the company will shut them out, or the company itself will be shut out by venture capitalists as such. So this is an important program for you to actually as a cost reduction measure. Now that feeds to the definition of the strategy of ZBB. So every year you keep on doing this, and you keep on redefining the ZBB target. For example, Unilever redefined their target 2 times. First was an overall efficiency in the company to the extent of 18%. Second was to say that in sales and marketing, they'll achieve 24% decline in costs. So these are two targets that were coming out. Of course, it's a large multi-billion-dollar organization. When you're talking about a million-dollar organization, million or a partly $100,000 organization, it may be different, but it may be a good choice to actually. It may be a good time to actually make a choice in terms of what are going to be your GM targets, what are going to be your EBITDA targets, and what are the outliers, and what are the. I mean, just simply ask your employees and co-founders as to whether they are in line with the ZBB program as such. This is how your post-COVID budget is going to look like. You're going to be having a revenue. You're going to be having, I'm talking about the first line item over here. You're going to be having a revenue. I've taken a revenue of $100,000. You will have 2020 revenue will be accrued revenue, which is which you've already accrued, which you have signed, which you have delivered. On top of it, you will have prospects. These prospects have to be reevaluated. So you may have these prospects will have a binomial or a bipolar choice, which will say that they will say no by now is not a good time, and so on and so forth, or they may say no, we want to go ahead with this particular program, and so on and so forth. Or target revenue minus the loss in revenue expected. Please expect a loss in revenue that will come up, and this particular loss in revenue is something that has to flow into your budget as such. Now that brings to your gross margin. The gross margin is basically your targeted gross margin post-COVID. Now this targeted gross margin is your ZBB driven gross margin. Now remember that your suppliers or the people that you're selling to may already be implementing a zero-based costing program, and when I say this, there are anecdotal evidences that beverage industry, tech industry, tech, especially edutech and fintech, have already started with zero-based budgeting program as such. So if they are in zero-based budgeting, and if we are not in zero-based budgeting, there is a discrepancy, and you may not be a chosen vendor for them anymore. And then you have marketing, R&D, professional fees, and other expenses. Ask them for budget for their particular departments. Even if it's a co-founder, I think there's no harm in asking a co-founder as to why they have incurred that particular cost, and why that particular cost should be part of the overall budget as such, whether it is in line with the overall gross margin as such. Now come to 2021. I'll go to the target EBITDA in a little while, but come to 2021, you have your accrued revenue, which is from 2020. You have the prospects, but you have a bounce back plan. Because you have implemented a ZBB, you have a bounce back plan. And this bounce back plan is basically a plan where you say that, where your clients come back and say that, oh, I think I have a little bit of breathing space when it comes to the discretionary spend, and I will come back to possibly making my static website into a dynamic website, and so on and so forth. I'm just giving a very rudimentary example. And then you have target gross margin, assuming recovery, but it may not necessarily recovery. For example, World Bank has projected that India will grow at 2%. US is a negative 7%. Italy, Europe zone is a negative 7%. India again. There is a high possibility that we may grow at abysmally low as 0.6%. It cannot be considered growth. It's a stagnation as such. So if that is going to be the situation, What is going to be your gross margin? So are you going to bounce back as such? So again, your other costs, budgets from different departments, and so on and so forth. Now I'll come to EBITDA, which is your ninth line item, where you have 40,000 negative. You have your target EBITDA. The target EBITDA is something that your CFO should give you. The CFO should basically say that, look, promoters, if you have to survive COVID, and if you have to survive with the cash that we have, this is what our target EBITDA is going to be. And you can of course compare it to your comparables to say that, I mean, we have a lot of startups over here. Each one can compare themselves and talk to each other to say that, what is your EBITDA and what is my EBITDA and so on and so forth in percentage terms, of course. And then say that, look, it's reasonable to assume that I'll have the target EBITDA of so and so. 2021, you will have a target EBITDA and you will have a carry forward EBITDA because you would have done well in 2020, assuming that you have done well. And then you have a recovery period, which is 2021, and then you'll get over with in terms of overall COVID budget as such. Then on the right, I'm being more specific over here with the marketing budget. In 2019, you have incurred a cost of $200,000. The planned cost is again $200,000. In 2020, what you may want to do is you may want to identify the top 10 vendors in their spends, identify the contribution of each vendor, define the need for continuation of the vendor with a reduced list of vendors, what would be the spend, why is the M&S driving the sales and increased costs justify the drop in sales. And it may sound all question at types, but let's delve each of them into a deeper exercise. Assuming that, I mean, I want to ask the startups over here a question which which you need not answer right now, which we'll discuss during the Q&A session. What if the people that you're selling to are asking themselves these questions? If they are asking themselves the question as to what the top 10 vendors are, and if you feature in the top 10 vendors, and if they say that, why don't we do a contribution benefit analysis in terms of whether they are actually making sense to retain or not making sense to retain, you would land yourself in a soup. So it is better to be prepared right away to say that and communicate and to possibly send out a message that, look, we are already in the process of reducing our cost. Reduction of cost may not be the right word, but already in the process of zero-based budgeting and so on and so forth. And then you have 2021, which is identify the committed cost. So you have again and again I go to the committed cost because of the fact that legally you may be obligated for certain costs. One of the costs would be retention of certain employees. Certain employees cannot be made redundant. I'll answer one-on-one as to if you have specific questions as to who those employees can be, but it cannot be shared in a larger forum. Repeat the process instituted in 2020. So repeat. It takes 3 years to implement a ZBB program. And as the governments and as the economic forums suggest, it will take 3 years for us to bounce back. So now there is no better time than now to actually start implementing ZBB program because your competitors are already doing it. It can backfire. People are used to budgets and cannot work on a shoestring. People are, unfortunately, we are used to, certain costs to be incurred. I mean, I'm talking about an example of, my 5-year-old son comes 6:30 in the evening and he goes to my phone. It's quite personal that I'm sharing with you. He goes to my phone and opens the Swiggy app and he has to look through all the cakes that are available. It is quite an addiction that has happened over there. I have to get him off that. But budgeting itself is an addiction because people are used to working with budgets. People are used to saying that, look, people are used to going to a promoter and saying that, hey, listen, we are going out for lunch, so the tab is on you. Maybe you need to ask yourself as to, whether that is rational, whether that is required in this particular phenomenon as such. It may be considered a reductionist approach. People will be enthusiastic in the beginning. and then they may just say that, oh, it's just another exercise that you're doing to reduce the cost and so on and so forth. Trust me, many of the startups have arbitrarily stopped working, or arbitrarily shut shop and then bounce back. Shop Close is one example. Snapdeal was on the verge of it. Then they bounced back. They did not implement a ZBB, but if they had implemented ZBB, there is some evidence that ZBB was implemented in some programs. Essential services may be missed. For example, your employee morale would go down if you were to say that, look, the coffee vendor, the coffee guy who is going to come in at 11 o'clock is not going to come. You have to go to the vending machine and probably take a coffee. So you may miss out on certain essential services. Your must-have list may grow phenomenally to a point where there may be petty politics to say that each department, each person will come and say that, look, for you, it is not a must-have. For me, it is a must-have. Why are you arguing with me, and so on and so forth? In that particular case, people may leave, and then you may not have money. It can backfire. Please be cognizant of this particular aspect. COVID scare. Some data for you. Parag, I'll just take another 5 to 10 minutes. I have only 2 more slides. Would that be all right?
Sure, that's fine.
So paradoxically, 63% of the MSME firms. So MSME firms are people who have less than 10 crores of revenue. In a survey conducted in March, responded that they would be spending more this year. It's a paradox. They wouldn't be spending less. They would actually be spending more, but they would not be spending more on non-value addition activities. So renewal of contracts are going to be delayed, and the delay is going to be affecting your accrual process. The commitment to retain employees is going to be an overhead, because these are the employees that you had from the beginning. These are the employees who were supporting you from the beginning. You just can't go over to their desk and say that, look, you don't bring much to the table, and hence you are fired. So that is something that that is going to be hanging on your head. It's going to be an emotional situation where you have to think through whether you want to let go of the best employee or the longest period employee. Contracts that are entered into before COVID have to be honored unless there is force majeure. Force majeure is something that I'll cover in a later session. But all the contracts that have entered into earlier, unfortunately, have to be honored. Unfortunately or fortunately, have to be honored. So unless you have a force majeure clause, which you can prove, and which if you're working with a large group, and you don't want to, for example, you are working with a future group, and you are not in a position to actually enforce a force majeure with a multi-billion-dollar entity. So that is something that you need to factor in. The silver lining is that the economy is always bounce back after an incident of this nature. We saw it in 2003. We saw it in 2000. 2000 created Infosys. 2000 really created the wealth for Infosys. 2008 created the wealth for Flipkart. 2013 created the wealth for Snapdeal. 1920 is going to create wealth for startups. So don't worry about the economy bouncing back. It's just I wouldn't say it's temporary, but bouncing back is there. Can ZBB work? Yes, no, yes. If you can define your expenditure and can argue, can have an open conversation as to why it is needed. If this argument can support the further spend, right? If you are able to do, water cool, if you are able to do, if you are able to have, candid conversation with your promoters as well as employees as to why you want a particular expenditure, then you are in for ZBB. If you look at your budget and something is off, if you are looking at your 2020 budget right now as we speak, and if you feel that, look, something's not right about this budget, we can't achieve this, then you are in for ZBB. Why you're not in for ZBB? If the water cooler talks lead you to allocate budgets. So what I mean by water cooler talks is basically situations where each person is coming to you individually and saying that, look, I need that particular spend here. I have to spend that. I've already committed to Thomas that I will be giving him the contract this year. I can't renege. I have a very personal relationship. Blah blah blah. It won't work. If you do not have visibility over what your monthly spend is, it won't work. If you can't justify your spend rationally, it won't work. Lastly, I'm sorry, if I'm offending some people over here. If you're surrounded by yes people and who want to be on the must-have list, it won't work. For example, having an office, having an office space is a must-have, but having an office space in a very upscale locality like Kolaba may not be the right choice if for ZBB as such. What must you think about before you implement a ZBB? What is the expense? Why is the expense? Where is the expense? How is the expense incurred? When is the expense incurred? Who is the spend on and who owns it? Who owns it is very important. The person owning it is the person who has to give the answer as to why the particular expenditure is being incurred. If you're ready to answer all the questions that I've listed over here, you cannot even skip one. All the questions. If you can answer that, then you may evaluate the ZBB program as such. With that, I close my presentation. I'll go over to the Q&A. Should I? I'll just stop sharing then.
Yeah, that's fine. Well, thank you, Dr. Srikanth. That was a very insightful presentation. Now, now we'll move on to the Q&A session. And while I just collate those questions, maybe you would like to let everyone know what's the best way for them to reach out to you.
The best way to reach out to me is I will be communicating with Parag my personal details, and Parag, would that be all right if I allow you to reach out to them?
That's fine. That's fine.
Right. So I'll be giving my phone number as well as my contact details with Parag, and you can more than happy to take your questions.
Okay, great. So let's read this. Okay, so how is ZBB relevant in a service industry and in a trading business?
More so in the service industry, it is more relevant because of the fact that you will have a lot of overheads. And post-COVID, these overheads have to be thought through. In a service industry, if you can be very specific in terms of which service that you're referring to, but generally, service industry has a lot of loaded costs. And if you are doing a pay per person or pay per employee kind of stuff, you may want to rethink in terms of what is a fully loaded cost for that particular employee. Then what I mean by fully loaded cost is, you'll allocate the cost of rental, electricity, marketing, promotion, everything onto that particular employee, and you will load it and possibly give charge out to a particular customer. So ZBB is very relevant to actually cut out certain costs for charging out that particular employee's cost to a particular customer, because your clients may want to see decreased costs as such. How it is relevant to a trading industry? More so relevant because you will have to employ just in time. You will have to employ your inventory is a major cost that you will have in trading industry. You will have accrued, you'll have delayed orders, you'll have committed costs, and so on and so forth. A ZBB program will basically ask you to ask yourself a question as to whether a particular good has been traded or not. That's a ground shaking a question that you need to ask yourself, because you may be selling certain goods which are not profitable at all, and ZBB will help you identify those goods.
Okay. All right. So the next question is from Francis. Some innovative organizations allow budget increase only if the department is able to prove the value addition from the increase. Would this be how would we be able to implement it?
Unfortunately, Parag, I'm losing you. Can you repeat the question?
Sure. some innovative organizations allow a budget increase only if the department is able to prove the value addition from the increase. Can we implement it?
Can we implement it? Is that the question?
Yes, that seems to be the question.
That is the whole point of zero-based budgeting. The value addition is just one part of it. But the question is whether the value addition as compared to the value addition of other departments. So you're basically, unfortunately, ZBB also plays off between departments, right? So you are prioritizing between a particular department's value addition versus another particular department's value addition. So, for example, a finance department's value addition may not be as significant as the marketing department's value addition. So you are allocating budgets based on whose value addition is the most. So yes, while that is part of the ZBB program, but it has to be ranked, of course.
Okay. Now, the next question I think is a little more broader in scope. The spending nature of the individuals is expected to change dramatically. What percent of the community could we expect to have the previous spending nature post-corona, or how long do you think it will back to financially?
I estimate, like I mentioned in the presentation, I estimate a 2 year bounce back right now. But as a survey conducted of 63% MSMEs would want to spend more because uh, they want to survive. If you recall the quote that I made, which is yeah, in 2016, people who can code can be funded. In 2019, people who are scaling can be funded. In 2020, people who survive can be funded. All you need to do is cut back your costs, survive 2020, survive 2021, and you will see a change in spend by the opening of 2021 as such.
Okay. Now, another one more from a broader perspective. Do you think without COVID-19, the startup ecosystem would have explored more efficient routes for cash management?
Parag, unfortunately, I am having some audio issues, I believe. Can you repeat the question?
Yes. So, do you think without without the COVID-19 crisis, startup ecosystem would have explored more cash efficient routes?
This was a disaster waiting to happen, isn't it? I mean, unfortunately, COVID exposed it, which is why I'd given an anecdotal, anecdotal evidence of Unilever implementing it long before COVID did. The first blow I believe we had was of GST. The second, I mean, first blow was of demonetization. Second blow was of GST. I mean, I wouldn't exactly. The reason why I'm calling it a blow is because constantly you are shaken up, right? And unfortunately, the first two blows were geographically contained. The blow that we have right now is a more pandemic and more worldly nature, which means that your global clients are going to be affected. So what I'm trying to say over here is uh, uh, the change in cash management was imminent. VCs were going to tighten their purses. It so happened that the purse tightening has become even more stringent because of the fact that there is a COVID in place. So what I'm trying to say over here is, uh, I mean, you would have thought through your budgeting process anyway, but you would have possibly delayed it by saying that, "Arey, yaar, why in the process of growth, why would I want to spend another year in the budgeting process?" Because, mind you, zero-based budgeting program is a time-consuming exercise, and you have one thing in hand right now during lockdown, and that is time. So now would be a good time to actually explore it. Now I'm digressing. So what I'm trying to say over here is it was a crisis pending to happen. VCs would have invested in companies which are fundable, which are scalable, which have positive EBITDA margins. Long gone are companies which don't have positive EBITDA margins, and ZBB is just a tool to ensure a positive EBITDA margin.
Okay. Now, I think this will be the last question for the day. What is your advice to a brand new startup while planning their budget? They're just starting now.
A brand new startup. You are the sacred bunch. Now, you have a clean slate already. Now, when you have a clean slate, you have a possibility of creating a budget, which is right from the beginning, allocating activities which are oriented towards, I would say, the value that you're going to be deriving from that particular allocation of budget. So right in the beginning, you don't have to think through. I mean, now that you're starting out, you don't have to. You don't have a baggage to carry. So you don't have to say that previous year I allocated so much for my cost. This year, so start on a clean slate to say that if I were bare bones, I were to spend on digital marketing right now, what would be the spend? So classify your must-have cost, classify your good-to-have cost. So organic growth would be the norm right now. Inorganic growth may not be the norm. So maybe explore 6 months of organic growth, and then it comes 6 months of inorganic growth. So what you can do is, if you're a fresh startup, clean slate is there with you. List down, take a sheet of paper, list down your must-have costs, good-to-have costs. Your good-to-have costs will be funded by your VCs. Must-have costs will be funded by you. So unfortunately, that's a hard reality.
Okay, and that is the harsh truth. And with that, we are closing the session on zero-based budgeting. Dr. Srikanth, thank you once again for sharing your insights with us. And I will be sure to pass on your contact details to all of those in attendance. And to the attendees, thank you for coming on to this session.
Thank you so much. Pleasure is all mine.
All right. Have a good day, everyone.
Goodbye.